Welcome to Stories Junction. Let's begin today's story. I'll never forget the night it all began. I came home after a long day, expecting the usual rhythm of my life to carry me through. Drop my jacket on the chair, kick off my shoes, maybe sink into the recliner with a beer before deciding on dinner. That's how it always went in our little apartment in Portland. But the second I stepped through the door, I felt it, a shift in the air, heavy and unfamiliar. Lena, my wife of 8 years, was standing in the living room, arms folded tightly across her chest. Her face wasn't angry or upset, just distant, like she'd already checked out of whatever we'd built together. Her voice came out flat, measured. "We need to talk." Those words never led anywhere good. I let out a slow breath, already steeling myself. "Okay," I said, setting my keys on the table. She inhaled deeply, like she'd practiced this moment in front of a mirror. Then she locked eyes with me and said, "You need to earn my closeness." I froze. "What?" The words slipped out before I could stop it. She didn't waver. "You heard me." I let out a short, baffled laugh, waiting for her to elaborate, to give me something to grab onto. But she just stood there, arms still crossed, like she'd dropped a universal law I was supposed to accept without question. "I don't feel the way I used to," she went on. "I don't know if it's you or me, but something's gone, and I'm not going to fake it." I stared at her, my brain scrambling to catch up. Gone? What did that even mean? You mean connection? Intimacy? What are we talking about here, Lena? My voice was sharper than I intended, but I needed clarity. "All of it," she said simply. "I don't feel pulled toward you anymore. But I want to. I think if you put in more effort, if you showed me more, we could find it again." Something twisted inside me. Not anger, not yet, but a cold, dawning awareness. She wanted me to earn her affection, like I hadn't already poured years into this marriage, into us. I studied her face, searching for a crack in her resolve, a hint that this was a game or a misunderstanding. But she was a statue, unyielding. I exhaled hard. "So what? I'm auditioning for you now. Like I'm trying to win something I thought I already had." She shrugged, a small, casual motion that stung more than her words. "It's not about auditioning. It's about making me feel desired." Desired? I'd spent years making her feel that. Flowers on random Tuesdays, late-night talks when she couldn't sleep, trips to her favorite spots along the coast. But had she ever stopped to wonder who was making me feel desired? I bit down on the thought, my jaw tightening as I looked away to keep from saying too much. If I snapped, she'd turn around on me. Instead, I asked, "And what about me? Do I get to feel desired? Or is that not part of the deal?" She sighed like I'd missed the point. "I don't know, Jack. I just know I need more." And there it was not we. This wasn't about fixing us. It was about her. I thought of all the times I'd bent over backwards, working late to pay for her grad school, skipping my own plans to be there for her. And now, somehow, that wasn't enough. Now I had to claw my way back in her heart like some desperate stranger. The worst part? She didn't even seem fazed saying it. I didn't fight her that night. Not because I agreed, but because I needed space to think. Lena expected me to leap into action, to chase her like a dog after a bone, proving I was worthy of her attention. So instead, I watched her. It started small, subtle. The next morning, over breakfast, she stirred her tea too hard, the spoon clinking against the mug. "You used to do little things for me, you know," she said, not looking up. I nodded, but didn't bite. That evening, she flopped onto the couch with her phone, letting out a dramatic sigh. My friend Tara said her husband just planned this whole weekend getaway for her. So sweet. It was bait, plain and simple. She wanted me to jump in. "I've done stuff like that too. Or I'll plan something, just wait." But I wasn't playing. "Nice," I said, flipping through a book. Her eyes flicked to me, waiting, then narrowed when I didn't budge. That's when she turned it up a notch. She started dressing differently. Fitted dresses, lipstick, a spritz of that jasmine perfume she hadn't worn in years. At first, I thought it was for her a confidence boost. But then I caught it, the way she'd linger by the mirror, adjusting her necklace, stealing glances at me, waiting for me to say something. To notice. To validate. I didn't. One night, I was on the couch, scrolling through my phone when she walked by in a dress that clung to her, just right. She paused by the doorway, fiddling with her hair, shifting her weight. I kept my eyes on my screen. She cleared her throat. I don't know why I bother looking nice anymore. Then don't, I said, not looking up. She stood there, silent, then marched off. The next morning, she barely spoke. Not mad, just expectant like I'd cave and apologize. I didn't. So she changed tactics again. She started going out more, mentioning coworkers, especially the guys, in passing, her tone too casual to be natural. Oh, Mark from the office was telling me about this new bar downtown, she'd say, watching me. One evening, she came into the kitchen as I poured a glass of water, decked out in heels and a sharp blazer, her hair swept up. She grabbed her bag, letting her hand rest on the counter a beat too long. I might be out late, she said, her eyes on me, testing. She wanted me to ask who, where, to show a flicker of jealousy, proof I still cared. I took a sip. All right, have a good time. Her face tightened, just for a second, before she turned and left. That's when I knew this wasn't about rebuilding us. It was about power, and she was losing her grip. The days after that night stretched into a strange, quiet standoff. Lena didn't back off, she doubled down. The subtle jabs and loaded comments weren't working, so she pushed harder, like she was trying to crack me open and find something she could still control. It started with her appearance. She'd come home from work in outfits I hadn't seen before, sleek blouses, heels that clicked sharply against the hardwood, hairstyled just so. She'd linger in the kitchen, pouring a glass of wine, glancing my way as if daring me to say something. I didn't. I'd nod or keep reading whatever was in front of me, and I could feel the air tighten with her frustration. Then came the plans. She started going out more, always with a casual mention of who she was meeting. Oh, just some people from work, she'd say, or Ryan was telling me about this new spot, so we're checking it out. She tossed those names out like breadcrumbs, waiting for me to follow them, to ask questions to show I was rattled. One night, she breezed through the living room in a black top and jeans that fit like they were tailored, her perfume trailing behind her. Don't wait up, she said, her voice light but her eyes sharp, watching me. I was sprawled on the couch with a beer, half watching some documentary. Cool, I said, taking a sip. She hesitated, then left. The door clicked shut, and I exhaled. She wanted a reaction, and I wasn't giving her one. It wasn't that I didn't care, I did once. But every time she pulled this, it chipped away at whatever was left. I started noticing how one-sided it had all become. I'd spent years keeping us steady, cooking dinners when she was stressed, driving her to appointments, listening when she needed a vent. And now she was acting like none of it counted unless I kept performing, kept proving I was enough. The more she pushed, the less I wanted to play along. Her tactics shifted again a few nights later. I was in the kitchen, heating up leftovers, when she came home late, close to 11. She dropped her bag on the counter with a thud, her coat still on, and stared at me. You didn't even text, she said, her tone clipped. I glanced up from my plate. Didn't know I needed to. Her arms crossed, a familiar shield. It's late, Jack. You didn't wonder where I was. I shrugged, taking a bite. Figured you were fine. Her eyes narrowed, and I could see her jaw working like she was chewing on something she couldn't spit out. You don't even care, do you? I set my fork down and leaned back against the counter, meeting her gaze. She wanted me to flinch, to show some spark of insecurity or need. But I was tired of the games, tired of guessing what invisible line I'd crossed this time. You want me to be honest, Lena? She didn't answer, just kept staring. No, I said. I don't. The words hung there, heavy and final. Her face shifted, surprise first, then something sharper, like I'd pulled a rug out from under her. She'd spent weeks building this narrative where I'd fight for her, where I'd bend over backwards to win her back. But I wasn't, and she didn't know how to handle it. She didn't say anything else that night. She grabbed her bag and disappeared into the bedroom, the door shutting with a soft click. I finished my food, washed the plate, and sat back on the couch, staring at the TV without really seeing it. For the first time, I felt a kind of clarity settling in. Not anger, not sadness, just a quiet understanding. This wasn't about fixing anything. It was about her needing to feel wanted, and me refusing to be her prop anymore. The next morning, she was different. Not warmer, not softer, just restless. Over coffee, she barely looked at me, stirring her mug in tight little circles. "I'm going out with Tara tonight," she said, her voice flat. "Okay," I replied, flipping through my phone. She waited like she expected me to push back, to ask why she was out so much lately. When I didn't, she got up and left the room. That's when the outburst started. Small at first, but pointed. One evening, she was brushing her hair in the bathroom. The door opened, and she called out, "You don't even try anymore, do you?" I was on the bed, scrolling through emails. "Try what?" I asked, not looking up. She laughed, short and bitter, like I'd said something absurd. "To make this work, to care about us." I set my phone down and sat up, meeting her eyes in the mirror. "What exactly am I supposed to be fixing, Lena? You keep saying something's wrong, but you can't even tell me what is." She turned, gripping the edge of the sink. "That's the problem, Jack. You don't do anything. You just sit there." I took a slow breath. "So I'm failing because you can't figure out what you want?" Her lips pressed tight, and she turned away, yanking the brush through her hair harder than necessary. It escalated from there. A few nights later, she stormed in after midnight, heels loud against the floor as she tossed her keys onto the table. I was in the living room, a book open in my lap. She stood there, hands on her hips. "You didn't even notice I was gone this long." I glanced at the clock, 12:07. "Yeah, I did," I said, turning a page. Her voice rose. "And that doesn't bother you?" I looked up, keeping my tone even. "Should it?" She froze, her hands dropping to her sides. I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she was holding herself together by a thread. "You don't care," she said, quieter now, like she was testing the words. I closed the book and stood, facing her fully. "You keep saying that, but what you really mean is I'm not chasing you. I'm not begging you to tell me what's wrong or where you've been. That's what you want, isn't it?" Her eyes flickered, and for a second, I thought she'd deny it. But she didn't. She just turned and walked away, leaving me standing there with the truth neither of us wanted to say out loud. She wasn't just frustrated anymore. She was unraveling, and I wasn't sure how much longer I could stand to watch. The air in our apartment grew heavier after that night. Lena's frustration wasn't subtle anymore. It spilled out in sharp edges and loud silences. She stopped testing me with hints and glances and started reacting like she was desperate to shake me out of whatever calm I'd settled into. I could see in the way she moved, quick, restless, like a storm building. One evening, she was pacing the kitchen, her phone in hand, muttering about some work deadline. I was at the table, eating a sandwich, when she spun around and snapped, "You don't even ask how my day was anymore." I swallowed, setting the sandwich down. "How was your day, Lena?" My voice was flat, not because I didn't care, but because I knew where this was going. She scoffed, tossing her phone onto the counter. "Don't bother now. It's not like you mean it." I leaned back in my chair, watching her. "What do you want me to say?" She threw her hands up. "That's the problem, Jack. You don't say anything. You don't do anything. It's like you've given up." I took a slow breath, keeping my eyes on her. "Given up on what?" "You keep telling me something's wrong, but you won't say what. How am I supposed to fix something you can't even name?" Her face tightened, and she turned away, gripping the edge of the sink. "I shouldn't have to spell it out for you," she muttered. I didn't respond. She wanted me to guess, to scramble, to prove I was still in this. But I was done guessing. The next night, it got worse. She came home late again, past midnight, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the frame. I was in the bedroom, reading, when she stormed in, her coat still on, her cheeks flushed from the cold, or maybe something else. "You didn't even call," she said, her voice sharp and accusing. I set the book down and looked up. Didn't think I needed to. She laughed, a harsh, jagged sound. "Of course you didn't. Why would you? You don't give a damn where I am or what I'm doing." I sat up, keeping my tone steady. "You're out late all the time now, Lena. I figured you'd tell me if something was wrong." Her eyes blazed. "That's it? That's all you've got? I'm out there living my life, and you just sit here like it doesn't matter?" I stood, crossing my arms. "What do you want me to do? Follow you? Beg you to come home? Tell me what this is really about?" She glared at me, her hands balling into fists. "It's about you not caring, Jack. You didn't even try to fight for us. There was again, fight for us. Like this was a war I was supposed to wage alone. I stepped closer, my voice low. And what about you? Where's your fight? All I see is you walking out, throwing hints, waiting for me to chase you. That's not us. That's you. Her jaw clenched, and for a second, I thought she'd yell. But she didn't. She turned and stalked out, leaving me standing there, the silence louder than any argument. That was the tipping point. The next few days, she barely spoke to me, just curt nods or one-word answers. But I could feel her watching, waiting for me to crack, to apologize, to beg her to stay. I didn't. I went to work, came home, lived my life like I always had. And the less I reacted, the more erratic she got. One night, she came home with takeout, something she hadn't done in months, and set it on the table like an olive branch. Thought we could eat together, she said, her tone too casual. I glanced at the bags. Sure, I said, grabbing a plate. We ate in silence, the clink of forks against plates the only sound. She kept looking at me, waiting for me to say something more, but I didn't. When we finished, she cleared her throat. This was nice, right? I nodded. Yeah. Her lips pressed thin, and she got up, leaving the room without another word. It was clear she didn't know what to do with me anymore. She'd built this game where I was supposed to pursue her, where my desperation would prove my love. But I wasn't desperate. I was tired, and that's when I felt it, the shift inside me. I wasn't angry anymore or even hurt. I was just done. I started thinking about what I wanted, not what she expected. I'd spent so long trying to hold us together, but for what? To keep playing a role in her script? The next morning, I woke up early. Lena was still asleep, her breathing soft and even. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall, feeling the weight of it all settle in. There was nothing left to salvage, not because I didn't love her once, but because love wasn't enough when it only went one way. I ran a hand through my hair and stood, heading to the kitchen. As the coffee brewed, I heard her stir, her footsteps padding down the hall. She appeared in the doorway, her hair messy, her eyes cautious. "Morning," she said, testing the waters. "Morning," I replied, pouring a mug. She grabbed one too, standing across from me, waiting. When I didn't say anything, she sighed. "Look, about last night." I cut her off, setting my mug down. "I want a divorce." The words hit like a thunderclap. She blinked, her mug frozen halfway to her mouth. "What?" I took a breath and repeated it, slower this time. "I want a divorce, Lena." She laughed, a short, nervous sound. "You're just upset. You don't mean that." I shook my head. "No, I do." Her face changed, shock first, then disbelief. "You're serious?" she asked, her voice small. "Yeah," I said, holding her gaze. "I am." She set her mug down hard, coffee sloshing over the edge. "This is ridiculous, Jack. You're overreacting." I didn't argue. I just stood there, letting her process it. Her eyes darted around, searching for a way to turn this back, to make it my fault. "You can't just throw this away," she said, her voice rising. "We've been together 8 years." I nodded. "I know, and I'm done." She stared at me, like she was seeing me for the first time. Not the Jack she'd molded into her story, but someone else, someone she couldn't bend anymore. She opened her mouth, then closed it, her hands trembling. I turned back to my coffee, and she walked out of the kitchen, the silence between us thicker than ever. That was the moment I knew there was no going back. The night I told Lena I wanted a divorce, something broke loose inside me. Not in a loud, dramatic way, but quietly, like a knot finally unraveling. She didn't fight me as I packed. I'd expected her to argue, to throw accusations or guilt my way, but she just sat on the couch, arms crossed, staring at the floor. Her silence wasn't surrender. It was disbelief, like she thought I'd come crawling back once the dust settled. I zipped up my duffel bag, grabbed my keys, and paused at the door. I looked at her, half expecting some last-ditch plea, a crack in her armor. But she didn't move, didn't even meet my eyes. I took a deep breath and walked out. The door clicked shut behind me, and I didn't look back. 2 weeks later, I had a place of my own, a small studio on the east side of Portland, all exposed brick and creaky floors. It wasn't much, just a bed, a couch, and a few boxes I hadn't unpacked, but it felt like a blank slate. No more tiptoeing around someone else's moods. No more waiting for approval that never came. The first few nights were strange, too quiet, too empty. I catch myself wondering if I'd made a mistake, if I should have fought harder for what we had. But then I'd remember the last year with Lena, the endless hoops, the way she'd turned our marriage into a test I could never pass. And the doubt would fade. I started rebuilding piece by piece. I joined a gym down the street, the kind with cracked mirrors and rusty weights, and went every morning before work. I picked up my guitar again, something I hadn't touched in years, letting the chords fill the apartment late at night. I reconnected with friends I'd let drift away, guys like Matt, who'd text me out of the blue to grab a beer. At first, I thought I'd feel lost without the structure of my old life, but instead, I felt lighter. I wasn't running from anything. I was running toward myself. Then, a month in, I met Claire. It wasn't some grand moment. No bar pickup or awkward setup. We bumped into each other at a coffee shop near my place, both reaching for the same lid on the counter. She laughed, said, "You go first," and that was it. We got to talking about the rain, about the city, about nothing much at all. She had this easy way about her. No games, no hidden agendas. Dark hair, quick smile, the kind of person who didn't need to fill every silence. We swapped numbers, and a few days later, we met up for a walk along the river. It wasn't forced or planned. It just happened. Being with Claire was different. There were no tests, no unspoken rules. We'd grab coffee or hike out to the coast, talking for hours about music, work, dumb stuff we'd seen online. I wasn't trying to impress her, and she wasn't waiting for me to. It felt natural, like breathing after holding your breath too long. One night, we went to a little diner downtown, splitting fries and laughing about some terrible movie she'd watched. Afterward, we walked through the streets, her hand brushing mine until I took it. The city lights blurred around us, and for the first time in years, I felt something real, no strings, no weight. That's when I saw her. We were crossing the street, still laughing, when I felt it, a prickling on the back of my neck. I looked up, and there was Lena, standing on the sidewalk, frozen. Her eyes locked on me, wide and unblinking, like she couldn't process what she was seeing. Claire's hand was still in mine, and I felt her grip tighten slightly, sensing the shift. Lena took a step forward, her voice soft, almost lost in the noise of the street. "Jack," I nodded, keeping my tone even. "Lena." Her gaze flicked to Claire, then back to me, piecing it together. "You're with someone?" she asked, like the words didn't fit in her mouth. Claire stayed quiet, letting me handle it. "Yeah," I said simply. "I am." Lena's lips parted, but nothing came out. She looked stunned, like she'd never imagined me moving on, like I was supposed to stay stuck, waiting for her to decide my worth. Her hands clenched at her sides, and for a second, I thought she'd say something sharp, something to pull me back in her orbit. But she didn't. She just turned, her steps quick and stiff, disappearing into the crowd. I exhaled, feeling Claire's eyes on me. "You okay?" she asked, her voice gentle. I nodded, squeezing her hand. "Yeah, I'm good." And I was. Seeing Lena didn't drag me back. It cemented what I already knew. I wasn't hers anymore. But that wasn't the end of it. That night, my phone lit up. A call from Lena, then another. I let them go to voicemail. Then the text started. "How could you move on so fast? Was it all nothing to you? Can we talk, please?" I stared at the screen, the words glowing in the dark. I didn't answer. A day later, I saw she'd followed Claire on Instagram, then messaged her. "He's still my husband." "Stay away." Claire showed me, rolling her eyes. "She's bold," she said, unfazed. I shook my head. "She's desperate." I knew Lena wouldn't let it go that easily. A week later, she showed up at my door. It was late, raining, and she stood there, soaked, her eyes red. "Jack, please," she said, her voice breaking. "I messed up. I didn't mean for this." I leaned against the frame, keeping the door half open. "You made your choice, Lena." She shook her head, tears mixing with the rain. "You're my husband. We can fix this." I looked at her, all the years we'd shared flashing through my mind, not with longing, but with clarity. "Not anymore," I said. "I'm happy now. Go home." She sobbed, pleading, but I didn't waver. I'd spent too long trying to be what she wanted. She opened her mouth to argue, but I stepped back and closed the door, the lock clicking into place. For a moment, I stood there, listening to her muffled cries fade as she left. No guilt, no second thoughts, just a quiet, steady relief. I turned away, back to my life, and for the first time, I wasn't afraid of what came next. After shutting the door on Lena that rainy night, I felt a stillness settle over me. Not the hollow kind I'd known with her, but something solid, like the ground had finally stopped shifting. She didn't come back. No more calls, no more texts, just silence. I half expected her to try again, to show up with some new angle to pull me back, but maybe she'd finally seen in my eyes. I wasn't hers to manipulate anymore. The divorce papers came a week later, delivered to my studio with her signature already scrawled across them. I signed, sent them off, and that was it. 8 years, reduced to a few pages and a notary stamp. I thought I'd feel more regret, maybe, or loss, but all I felt was free. Life in the studio took on a rhythm of its own. I'd wake early, hit the gym, then head to work, the days unfolding without the weight of expectation. Evenings were mine, sometimes strumming the guitar, sometimes meeting Matt and the guys for drinks at a dive bar near the river. The place wasn't much, just chipped tables and neon signs, but it felt like a reclaiming. I'd laugh louder than I had in years, the kind of laugh that didn't need permission. And then there was Claire, threading through it all like a melody I hadn't known I'd missed. We didn't rush anything. It wasn't about filling a void or proving a point. It just worked. We'd meet up after shifts at the bookstore, wandering Portland's rainy streets or grabbing takeout to eat on my couch. She'd tease me about my terrible taste in sci-fi movies, and I'd fire back about her obsession with old paperbacks that smelled like dust. There was no pressure, no hidden tests. One afternoon, we drove out to Multnomah Falls, the mist soaking us as we stood at the base, her shoulder brushing mine. "This is nice," she said, her voice cutting through the roar of the water. I nodded, feeling it too, not just the moment, but her. "Yeah, it is." Weeks turned into months, and I started to see how much I'd forgotten about myself with Lena, how I'd dimmed pieces of who I was to fit her frame. Claire didn't ask me to change, didn't need me to perform. One night, we were at her place, a cozy apartment cluttered with books and plants. She was cooking pasta, humming some tune I didn't recognize, when she caught me watching her. "What?" she asked, grinning. I shrugged, leaning against the counter. "Just this. You." She rolled her eyes, but her smile stayed. Later, as we ate, she reached across the table, her hand resting on mine. It was simple, unguarded, and it hit me I didn't have to earn this. That's when Lena resurfaced. Not in person, but through a mutual friend, Tara, who still talked to us both. I was grabbing coffee with Tara one Saturday when she brought it up, casual but careful. "Lena's been asking about you," she said, stirring her latte. I raised an eyebrow. "Yeah." Tara nodded. "She saw you with Claire a while back. Didn't say much, just asked if you were happy." I took a sip, letting that sink in. "What did you tell her?" Tara smirked. "That you're doing better than ever." She didn't like that. I chuckled, picturing Lena's face, the way she'd hate knowing I wasn't pining for her. "She okay?" I asked, not because I wanted to fix it, but because I was curious. Tara shrugged. "She's dating someone. Some guy from work. But she's, I don't know, restless. Like she's still figuring out why you left." I nodded, letting it settle. Part of me wondered if she'd ever get it, that it wasn't about her losing me, but about me finding myself. But that wasn't my problem anymore. I paid for the coffee and walked out into the drizzle, feeling lighter than I had in years. That night, I told Claire about it over beers at my place. She listened, her head tilted, then laughed. "She really thought you'd wait forever, huh?" I grinned, clinking my bottle against hers. "Guess so." Claire leaned back, her eyes warm. Her loss. And it was. Months later, I ran into Lena one last time. Claire and I were downtown, coming out a record store when I saw her across the street. She was with a guy, tall, dark hair, probably the one Tara mentioned. She didn't notice me at first, but then our eyes met. She froze, her hand slipping from his arm. I nodded, a small acknowledgement, and she nodded back, her face unreadable. The guy said something to her, And she turned away, but not before I caught the flicker in her expression, something like regret, maybe, or realization. I didn't linger on it. Claire tugged my sleeve, pulling me toward a food cart, and I let it go, the moment dissolving into the hum of the city. That was the end of it. No more calls, no more echoes. Lena faded into the background, a chapter closed, while my life stretched out ahead. Messy, imperfect mine. Claire and I kept building, not with grand plans, but with small, steady moments. Nights on the couch, trips to the coast, her laugh filling the spaces Lena had left empty. One evening, we were sprawled on a blanket at a park, the sky bruising purple above us. She rested her head on my chest, and I felt her breathing sync with mine. "You ever think about how we got here?" she asked, her voice soft. I ran a hand through her hair, smiling. "All the time." And I did, not with longing for what was, but with gratitude for what is. Lena had wanted me to chase her, to prove something she couldn't define. But walking away taught me I didn't need to prove anything. Not to her, not to anyone. I had this, Claire, the studio, the life I'd carved out, and it was enough. More than enough. As the stars blinked on above us, I closed my eyes, letting the past slip away for good. Whatever came next, I was ready.